Hello! From the Next Reels Film Board, this is Tommy Handsome with an important announcement. The following podcast includes movie audio clips that contain unbleeped profanity. Such profanity may include damn, hell, nuts, McGee, doodle, Captain Fuck, and toot toot, here comes the diarrhea parade. Listening discretion is advised.
Welcome to Trailer Rewind, a monthly conversation about movies you may have missed in theaters that are now available to watch at home on streaming services. Every month we dig into the archives and watch a film that Pete and Andy talked about in their trailer picks. We watch it and have a very spoilery conversation about it. Today, JJ and I are talking about Felony, a police thriller directed by Matthew Seville and starring Joel Edgerton, Tom Wilkinson, and Jai Courtney. This was Andy's pick from September 5th, 2014. Today is April 9th, 2018, and Felony is available on both Hulu and Amazon Prime. Before we go any further, you should check out our ever-expanding back catalog for this show and its sibling shows at thenextreel.com. If you've stumbled upon us, you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at The Next Reel. And whether you've just found us or have been listening for a while, you can be part of our community. For as little as $1 a month, you can support us as a patron on patreon.com/thenextreel, which gets you into our Discord group where there's always an engaging conversation about films. And you also get exclusive weekly Saturday matinee episodes hosted by a changing rotation from the Film Board Gang of Thugs, talking about movie news, trailer picks, and lists.
And you can listen live as we record.
Bonus. That's right.
Total bonus.
Lots of perks for our Patreon supporters. We love having you guys part of the community.
Yay.
So, JJ, for this one, Felony,
yeah.
Andy said what intrigued him the most about this is that it was Joel Edgerton's first produced feature screenplay. And he thought the story...
Which is amazing.
Oh, yeah. He thought it had a Dennis Lehane vibe. And of course, Tom Wilkinson pretty much elevates everything that he's in. So he was looking forward to this one. And I could see from the trailer exactly that sort of set my expectations for where this was going. What about you? What was your reaction to this one?
So I didn't know Andy's note until I had actually watched the film. So I went back and found out that it was Joel Edgerton's first produced feature screenplay. I was shocked that he wrote it. I thought that's fantastic. It was really great. I didn't really feel Dennis Lehane from it too much, but so different from how we usually watch our trailer rewind movies. I actually watched some trailers of this one before I saw it, so I ended up with some expectations, and I felt like I came into the movie really knowing what was going to happen. But one of the great things about this movie is that it played out everything it did in the trailer, but it did it relatively early. I would say played out everything that was in the trailer in the first 50% of the movie. And then it took a really creative and interesting direction with the piece of the cop thriller. I compare it to maybe a movie like Narc with Ray Liotta or something like that. Something that is really interesting in a psychological and in a philosophical way. And it really surprised me. I many times in the movie, I said to myself, I have no idea what's going to happen next. I don't know what they're going to do with this, which I thought was really special. I felt like it was a movie about what it's like to be human and also have to be a police officer. I found myself saying many times too, saying, really sucks to be human because there's so many just natural feelings that all these people have to deal with and fears and, self-protection and all these terrible things. And it's just such a terrible tragedy of events that unfolds in this movie. But it's a great dialogue about what is happening and told in a really, really creative way. So I was very pleasantly surprised. Even after I saw the trailer and got some expectations, it hit on those expectations and then surprised me in some of the turns towards the end. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, I went into this expecting a little bit more of a police procedural, because we have sort of two main sort of cases that are part of the story. And so I was hoping and expecting perhaps a little bit more of sort of untangling and solving those mysteries. Whereas the film really focuses more on the dynamic of of our three main characters and their relationship to each other. And as this story plays out, the impact it has on each of them and sort of how they play against each other, which I think works really, really well. So it wasn't what I expected, but I was pleasantly surprised to see a story like this that focuses on, as you said, what it means to be human and looking at each three of these men and their transformation over the story as they are sort of fighting for what they believe is right or how to survive this situation. So it wasn't what I expected, but it was a pleasant surprise in what it did deliver to me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up police procedural with it, because I didn't expect that was where I was going to go with it. But in the way that it's filmed, it almost kind of reminds me a little bit of The Wire in a positive way, in that it kind of just drops in and out of storylines as it's going through. And one second you're with Carl and Jim, the detectives that are investigating, and then the next second you're with Malcolm's family, who's the main character. That's the Joel Edgerton character, and it just kind of jumps back and forth, and it feels very stark in the way that The Wire is, where it doesn't necessarily it doesn't feel like it's trying to lead you a particular way in your opinions about what's going on in the film. So maybe it is a little bit procedural to start, at least, and then gets into some of the really interesting dramatic points of the story.
Well, what set that procedural expectation up for me was the scene early on. Our setup is, and this was interesting, our sort of opening of the film is a 911 call. And so we just hear a conversation between someone who's called emergency services, and there's been an incident involving a boy on a bicycle, and something's happened. And then we sort of jump into the story, and we get to see what's going on with Malcolm. He's on a raid. He gets shot. They're out celebrating afterwards, and then he's out driving. He is given a code word that the police officers, the detectives, can use if they get stopped at the sort of breathalyzer stations that are set up. And so he's able to get waved through that, although he probably should have been stopped from driving. He's been out drinking. And as he's driving, sort of grazes this boy on the bicycle. That's sort of our big event. And he's not sure how to handle that. And then we get introduced to Jim and Carl. And Carl has been working on this case, and so we get introduced to that, and there's this scene with he and Jim, and he basically tells Jim that this guy's guilty and we've got to get him, and he's like, you need to listen to these.
This is about a different case, right?
This is a different case. And so what he's setting up, and I guess I should sort of go back a little bit and say, so Jim and Carl are there on the scene after Malcolm calls emergency services. Carl goes over and talks to Mal. Jim is sort of the new guy on the beat and sort of sees the conversation from a distance and get the feeling he suspects something's going on. And so then in this later scene, when Carl basically tells him, if you look hard enough, you can always find something, and I need you to find something so we can wrap up this case. And to me, that set the expectation that Jim is going to take that sort of sentiment from Carl and apply it to Malcolm's situation. And that I thought this was going to be, how is Jim going to be able to basically get a piece enough parts of the puzzle together to basically reveal what we, the audience, know, that Malcolm's the guilty party in this. And so that's what I thought this was going to be, of the suspenseful thriller of Malcolm trying to cover up, his mistake, Carl sort of being complicit in that, and Jim being the new outsider, sort of drawing back the cover on some police corruption and cover up that cops, sometimes do things wrong and they're not held accountable for it. So I was expecting that type of procedural. So that's where I was coming from with that.
Hey, I'm looking at this file and I'm just curious what got you so into this Victor bloke. I mean, you got virtually nothing on him aside from, he's on the offenders register.
He did it.
Well, yeah, but
watch the tape.
That's a disc.
The disc. Watch it.
I've watched the disc.
Watch it again.
Got it?
I've got a date with my mother. Now, the file for the telephone intercept should be up. Listen to every word. If the footnote says nothing of interest, take it with a large pinch of sodium chloride. Okay. Find something. If you look hard enough, you always will. That's the way you're going to impress me, not by bringing me cups of coffee.
And so that almost reminds me of The Departed, right? I mean,
yes.
and this is not this isn't really into the depth of The Departed, but the thing that I loved about this movie is that it doesn't really go there. That where it goes instead is that Malcolm, our main character, he isn't trying to cover it up. He didn't know what to do. And and he was led there by Carl, and this whole thing of this like survival instinct and this terrible piece. And I mean, what led me into the feeling of, oh, it sucks to be human is, he was shot at work that day, and then they had all this celebration for him. So he's dealing with this adrenaline response, and then he's celebrating and all this stuff, and he makes terrible decisions, right? I mean, he should take a cab. They even show us a cab driving by and this sort of thing, but he doesn't make that decision. And then one of my favorite things about the scene where he hits the kid is that, and this is a really way to make a smart filming decision, is that they show the camera shows him basically passing the kid.
Yes.
Right? So you're in the car, and that's one thing about this movie. All the shots in the cars, they did a lot of kind of fixed camera shots in cars.
Yes.
Were really smartly done. And as Mal comes up and drives past this kid, all of a sudden then Mal becomes aware that the kid has fallen down. It's almost in a rearview mirror. We don't know what's happened. And the reason why that's so smart is because that's his perspective. He doesn't know what happened either. He's as surprised as we are. And so as the audience members, we get to live in that utter confusion and terror that he feels about this terrible decision that he made, and that now that this kid is hurt. And eventually we learn with the main character that his side mirror is bent in, and that's how he knocked this kid off his bike. And it's just it's so terrible and so frustrating. And then all the cops kind of line up over time to have to get in that survival response, and they're kind of end up protecting each other, even though none of them want to do it. They all want to come clean in one way or another. Well, maybe not Carl, but they all want to come clean. They all want to do the right thing, but they don't know how to do it, and they're bound by their terrible decisions. They're bound by we go into this metaphor later on. Maybe we want to talk about that scene where Carl gets blasted and starts to talk to Jim, the young guy in the force, about what it's like to be in a band. And if somebody in the band writes a terrible song, that we don't point and laugh at him, which it just felt like a pitiful scene for Tom Wilkinson, which he delivered fantastic. But we don't point and laugh at him. We don't make fun of the guy that said that wrote the bad song. This is a metaphor for a bad choice. We get together and we play that song because that's what we do in a band, which in general as a metaphor is a little bit weak, but he's drunk, so I'll give it to him. But that's the thing. They all made these terrible decisions, and then the movie was about what they had to execute to live through those terrible decisions. And wow, what an interesting, creative, dramatic point that this movie really makes when it gets to there.
Yeah, that's right. That's what you are. You're the guy nobody likes. You're the guy in the band that's always complaining. See, we're in a band, right? Like a musical band. Can you imagine that? And when somebody in the band writes a song, like it or hate it, we fucking sing it. And if someone in the band happens to write a fucking shitty song that nobody likes, we keep our opinions to ourselves and we sing it anyway. We don't stand to one side and laugh and point and say, oh, that's shit. I'm not doing that. Because that doesn't look good for the band, does it? And one day you're going to go bad. You're going to write a fucking shitty song. I know it. And then where will you be? On your own, because you're the guy that wants to go solo. You're the guy with the best judgment. But he didn't set out to do a bad thing, and don't make it out like he did. Victor, he set out to do a bad thing to that little girl. That's who. Not someone who made a fucking genuine mistake. So use your fucking head. Stop being a prick.
Finished?
Yeah, it really is about that brotherhood on the force of that they're a team and they have to be there for each other, because you need to be able to depend on those guys and rely on those guys and trust them that they will always be there to back you up even when you make a mistake. And unfortunately in this situation, is just so wonderfully crafted at the beginning to just follow along with Mal through that opening sequence, and he gets in that car, and it seems like, I mean, everything has just been pushing him in that direction, that he's there outside the bar. They give him the code word so he can get in his car, and then when he gets stopped, you're thinking, okay, they're going to catch him here. And because the young guy is like, pirate, what's this code word? Let me go talk to somebody. And then, oh, sorry, detective, go ahead. And he gets waved through. And then he's just driving the streets at like 2 or 3 in the morning. There's nobody there. And then you're thinking, okay, everybody can relate to this. He's had a really rough day. He had a couple of drinks. There's nobody on the road.
He got shot.
He got shot. He got shot. He's had a rough day. And then he comes across. Now, I will say, to me, it seemed as he passed him, I thought there was a slight thump sound.
There was. It
right?
was very light.
Very light, which I think plays into the, okay, he just, it's incomprehensible that you could just, casually be passing someone on a bicycle, and the next thing you know, the kid is on the ground unconscious. And it just seemed, from his perspective, it wasn't like, wow, we smacked this kid off and he, tumbled, very violently, and he wasn't mangled. It was just like, oh, the kid wobbled on his bike and fell over. And so we get that from him when he makes that phone call. But yes, for him, it's, as he's explaining things to Carl, and Carl, sort of pieces together exactly what happened. He'd already heard, oh yeah, you'd been shot. Oh, I had a couple. Okay. Yeah. This is how we help each other. And it creates this very interesting dynamic between all three of them that I think is, you can sympathize with each of them. The one piece of each of those characters that I struggle with the most is, and it comes back to that investigation that Carl's involved with, where he's after this, this guy Victor, and he is just so convinced that this guy is guilty. And then later on, we see it goes to trial, and the outcome isn't what Carl hoped for. And what I struggle with understanding, and maybe there's something that I missed, is why Carl is just so invested in that case and the guilt there. I can understand his wanting to help Mal cover for things. I understand Jim is the outsider of being sort of, this is about justice and what's right. And when he doesn't see a clear evidence pointing towards Victor's guilt. So that's the one piece I struggle with Carl. I mean, Tom Wilkinson's performance is great. That character piece I struggle with.
So I didn't understand it when I watched it either. And I thought it was actually kind of a toss-away case. But here's the hypothesis that in reflection about the movie I want to think about. Because when Jim goes back and looks at the video more closely, and he's looking at, this is security cam footage of where this girl was abducted, and we find out that she was later raped. Was she murdered too? I don't know. So. I don't remember the details of the story. But he's looking over all of the evidence, and he looks at a still picture of a man with a dog. And then at some point in the security cam video, he focuses very tightly on the dog that is running through the security cam footage. Now, I didn't understand what that meant when I was seeing it. And honestly, I usually love this in movies when they don't actually spoon feed it to us, when they just kind of let us work it out on our own. But I would say the way that I'm going to reconcile the character study, because they don't close that loop in the film, is that if Victor really is guilty, and he really did kidnap and rape that girl, then what Carl's depth of misery and what we see as corruption, if for some reason Victor didn't do it, is that Carl was being a good cop, and he figured it out through all the stuff that he looked at, and his frustration, his depth of the misery that he goes to when Victor gets off on a technicality is a reaction to that. So again, I don't know if that's actually what Jim found, but I will say that it actually pieces the story together right for me. If Carl is actually trying his darndest to do his good work, and these other terrible things that he's doing outside to keep the band of brothers together is somewhat holding things in balance. Because I feel like the way that the film ends for us is that they all continue to live their lives, and they try to balance out their good with their evil.
Okay. All right. So it's clear. I mean, we've talked about Malcolm, and I thought it was interesting his name choice, because they call him Mal, which grammatically means bad. Yes, exactly. So that was interesting. So you see his struggle, and then we've got Carl, and we've talked about sort of his role of like being that veteran of the force. But then we've got Jim, and we haven't really talked about him and what his big story is, and sort of what it is that's the choices that he's having to make. And that was another one that I was trying to piece together enough of who he was and what his choices were, because he ends up developing a relationship with the mother,
but he doesn't,
of the boy, right?
It's not a real relationship.
Right.
That's the problem.
Exactly.
Oh, such a gross scene. Such a gross scene. But again, I'll go back to my theme of this movie is it just sucks to be human, right? Because he wants to do, okay, so we're talking about the mother of the kid who was hit, and Jim is trying, this is like his first case, right? His first case as a detective, and he believes that something bad happened. So he wants to take care of the situation. He wants to make it better for the mom, and she's grieving and like all this stuff, and she's an attractive woman. So he gets attached, and all of a sudden he believes that there's something going on, and he tries to kiss her, and it happens to be, and she's not having any of it, which is fantastic the way they deal with that in the film. It's super awkward, and it's like, don't, and then that's the day that her son died. I mean,
oh yeah.
Ooh. Just the tragedy of that. Again, sucks to be human, because of course he's going to have those feelings probably are definitely going to come up in him, but that doesn't mean he should act on them, right? He still makes this terrible decision, and he still has to live with that. And in watching it, then they get to the hospital after they have this awkward encounter, and literally 15 minutes earlier, he could have consoled this mother who just dealt with her son dying. But because he tries to make it a pass at her, before he takes her to the hospital, he can't do anything.
Yeah.
And it's just, those kinds of creative drama and creative character pieces are what really made me love this movie.
What did you think of Jai Courtney's performance? Because I think everybody's familiar with and respects, Joel Edgerton as an actor, and Tom Wilkinson. Jai Courtney has got an interesting sort of track record. He was in Suicide Squad as Captain Boomerang. He was
that was him.
Yeah, he was in like Terminator Genesis. He was was in the Divergent Insurgent series. Again, not and I think on our film board, I think Tommy Handsome had some quite disparaging things to say about his performance, and I think it was in Divergent or in Insurgent. So
I have to go back and listen. I wasn't
sure what to expect from him, because he's not somebody that carries a film, and to put him in sort of with these two heavyweights that have proven they can really carry a film and carry a scene. How well do you think he held his own against those two?
Well, I think I think he held his own because he was perfectly cast in this role.
Okay.
Because this role is meant to be conflicted and not necessarily revealing about the emotions that he had. I mean, I think back to that scene that I'm talking about the metaphor with the bad band, when Tom Wilkinson playing Carl is totally loaded and going off about all this crazy stuff, and Jai Courtney sits there and takes it like the Crusader cop that he is, and waits, and his line after Tom Wilkinson's just giving it to him, as he says, "Are you finished?" And then he gets in the car and he leaves.
Yeah.
That's the Jim character. So, in general, of all the things that you mentioned, I don't know that I have a real favorite of his other performances either. So I don't remember Tommy's rant about it, but I'm not a huge fan of those movies that you talked about. But I will say that in this one, I think he was perfectly cast, and I was happy with his performance.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised as well, because there are several scenes where I think it was the casting for this character of Jim. I think it was a really good fit of what he can deliver as an actor and what the character was requiring, because he is very sort of closed off from everybody. I think it did work really well when you've got, Carl, who's just so effusive and just out there. And you've got, it's an interesting dynamic they set up from the beginning, because when we first meet Carl and Jim is pulled up to Carl's house to pick him up and is waiting, and honks the horn to let him know he's out there. Carl comes out and actually calls him on the phone and just, lays into him like, yeah, I'm coming out. And basically you woke up my wife, and all this. It's like, don't call me. And Jim's got coffee for him because he's like, he's perceptive. So he knows exactly what kind of coffee, Carl likes. And he's trying to do his best to, do well by his new partner and offering him coffee. And you see that aspect of him I thought, okay, here's a guy who pays attention to things and may not have the best way to interact, but he will make efforts to do the right thing. And I thought it was a great way to set up that character from the beginning. Later on, we go back to that scene of where Carl's telling him, pay attention, look hard, find something. That's how you're going to impress me, not by bringing me coffee. Where Carl's saying it's not about the little gestures, it's about results. It's about solving the case. And that's, again, which I find sort of the interesting twist, because Jim does delve into and discovers Malcolm's guilt and is trying to hold Carl accountable for that, saying, look, this is what you asked me to do. I should be impressing you because I've figured out what you two have been up to. Because he comes to Carl once saying, hey, we didn't do, forensics on his car. And, this is when Carl, keeps trying to sort of like sideline this thing. Like, this isn't important. Why are you coming after one of our own when we've got this Victor guy to go after? So, yeah, I thought, Jim was sort of like his role was sort of to, I guess, be the counterbalance to Carl. And then there's that scene, again, coming back to the band where it's the three of them in that place. And what really was unexpected for me was how far Carl went to really push Jim's buttons. I mean, he went way, way offensive in what he was saying to Jim about basically, hey, did you get together with that mom? Because, if you didn't now, hey, Mal has said he's going to turn himself in. So, hey, now you're really going to get in with her. And then says some really offensive things.
Yeah, he's a perceptive detective too.
Yes, he is. And then those two come to blows. And then, then things really just fall apart for Malcolm after that. Everything goes wrong in this guy's life.
Yeah. Well, but again, it's like this big circle, right?
Yeah.
Mal basically gives the same speech to Jim that Carl gave to Mal.
Yeah.
From what I understand, and again, this movie does not spoon feed it to you, so you don't know, Jim punched Carl in the back and he had a stroke.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when that happened, here's a spoiler. If you're listening to this, that's a huge spoiler because you will never see that coming.
No.
When you watch this movie, and that goes there. And then, what Mal goes through, and Joel Edgerton, to talk about his performance in this movie was his baby, right? He wrote this thing. When he goes through the car crash, and which is done very plainly, very starkly, in a way that he's bleeding. I thought he was going to lose his mind thinking about that everything that he's gone through with this kid that he's killed. And then, he walks to the mom's house, and his scene when he's just like pleading with her.
Yeah.
And just crying. Wow. It was huge and very emotional. Just really intense. And Joel Edgerton was fantastic in this movie. This was his movie, and he owned it. He owned it all the way through.
Oh, yeah. It's such an interesting journey you take with him. And there are little subtle things that, again, he's not spoon feeding it to you, but there's a scene that just really, I thought, resonated and I think plays into the psychology of someone who's guilty. Because there's a scene where he's trying to bust up this whole drug ring. And so they've got sort of an informant, a guy who used to be a cop who sort of found himself on hard times. Now he's dealing drugs, and they're in there trying to get some information. They're trying to broker a deal with him to get not just some names, but the means of communication. How are the people in this drug ring communicating with each other? That's what they need to know. And he just starts, talking to this guy of like, hey, I understand. then he starts talking about, yeah, I know you've got 2 kids, and then you lost your job, and you're worried about, everybody finding out about what you're doing. And if you work with us, we can get a letter from the magistrate to just clear all of this. But if you don't work with us, your name's going to be in the paper. And what's that going to do? And going down the road of public shame. And I'm thinking, as he's saying all these things to this guy, that's everything that's going through his own head.
Yep. He's talking to himself.
He's talking exactly to himself. And I thought, such smart writing, because it's not, you could just watch that scene and not catch that at all. There's nothing in there. But because I think he set this film up as, pay attention to this dialogue, be careful.
This is The Next Reel. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Andy Nelson.
Hey.
And we spoiled...
Wait.
Oh. Hello? What? I'm getting some feedback. Andy, are you there?
Is this... Are we on a... I thought we decided not to use our trucker... Our trucker radio.
Oh.
Hey, everybody, we've got some special guests here breaking in.
Breaker.
Pete's going to have fun editing this one now. He just made a fun task for himself.
Doing it to himself. Hey, and that's actually what we were talking about. Right before that.
Let me just say
Sucks to be human.
Andy and I are sitting there.
Sucks to be human.
Andy and I are... I'm saving all of this. Andy and I are sitting there saying, how often do we record shows at the same time?
Never. This is the first.
We are going to live with horrible regret if we don't do this once. So there you go. This is it. I hope it was worth it.
Had you guys already started, or have you just finished?
We're about to start.
Oh, see, that's fine for you. You jumped in right in the middle of our show.
Exactly.
That was the point.
Could not be more perfect. What? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Felony.
What is your movie? Felony. I haven't seen
Excellent.
It's really, really good.
Now, Andy, you've watched it since you
I did.
It was a trailer pick. Yeah, you saw it on the list. You watched it like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So we have this opportunity. Did it live up to your
Yes,
expectations?
Andy, tell us what you thought about Felony.
I had such a great time with Felony.
Yes.
That Joel Edgerton, he is quite the storyteller.
That's what we were talking. We were just talking about. Actually. No, it's a surprise. It's not. I shouldn't say it's a surprisingly good movie. It's just it's really special. It's actually very creative and in ways that you would not expect going into it.
Absolutely true.
All right. I'll put it on the list.
See?
And I think we should let you guys get back to your show.
Yes. You remember what
really
you're talking
nice
about?
Talking to you though.
Sucks to be human.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. I love you
guys. What a pleasant surprise.
That was awesome.
All right. So I think is there any other part of the story that we haven't delved into that you wanted to discuss?
Well, there's one scene that I want to talk about, because one of the things we talked about before we got into this movie is that a lot of my favorite things in this movie were visually, the way that it was presented visually. There's a fantastic number of fixed camera shots that were set up in ways to give you the lay of the land. They were scene setters in really creative ways. There were overhead shots. There were things fixed to cars. There were things fixed through windshields. There was lots of great stuff. But one of my favorite scenes that we haven't talked about yet is after Malcolm, so Joel Edgerton, gets the news that the kid, and again, they still believe it's the kid he saved, the kid that he hit has died.
Oh, yeah.
And he's at work, and it's kind of his boss, right? Or it's the constable or whatnot, tells him this and kind of, mentions it to him quietly. And he's on his way to the board to talk to his team about his drug bust. And he goes to the board, and he's just sitting there, and he's reflecting, and we linger on him a bit. But then there's a shot that's shot from across the room, and it's shot between two members of his team looking at him. And he looks back at the camera and is still considering all the news that he's received, because he's guilty, right? He's behaving like a guilty person. The reason why I love that shot is because at the beginning, when it sets it up, and I do this a lot of times when I see camera shots like this, is I'm like, who's looking at him? Who's watching him? He feels like he's watched, right? So why are we as the audience doing this? But what I think is really creative, and why this is a really creative way to shoot it, is because we are everyone, and he feels like everyone sees him. So the shot wasn't about who we were as the audience. The shot was about how Mal felt after that moment. He felt like everyone knew he was guilty. And wow, what a great creative way in film to represent that. So there were shots like that all throughout this movie, and it really impressed impressed me that it was shot that way. It might have been written into the screenplay that way. It's just, it's really smart and creative for a movie that's making a very simple philosophical point, but it's a simple philosophical point that's not usually made. You talked about these guys feeling guilty for the things they're doing wrong. That's actually kind of plainly told to us through the way their stories are brought out. And those other movies we've mentioned, like Narc, like The Departed, that's not what happens to the corrupt cops. The corrupt cops go bad, and they are all bad. In this, they're still good people. They're just doing wrong, and they don't know how to live without their guilt. And I think that's such a great story to be told.
Yeah, no, I agree. There were a lot of scenes in the police station there where Jim is watching, and I think that's sort of also giving us a little bit of, he's watching how Malcolm's behaving. He's watching and he's perceiving that guilt. He's observing that of like, how, why is he sitting there alone, or how is, he's creating that distance between himself as he's, because he does feel that everyone does know that, and it does build up to that moment you just talked about. And there are so many great silent moments. It makes it hard to find, a segment to play for our listeners of like, here's a great scene to listen to, because a lot of it is the visual strength of how things are presented. Or after Malcolm's had his car accident and he goes to the apartment to talk to the mother, the way that is shot, because he's disoriented and he's losing consciousness. It's just portrayed visually so well to create that sense of confusion, the blackout, the haziness of everything just worked so well to create that sense of what it's like to have a concussion, to have that just works so well. In so many shots in this, they're not quite to the point where I'd say, oh, that's a painting, I want to capture that. But there are so many where the layout, the arrangement and setup and framing is just very visually pleasing and works well. And there's also great use of distance because there's the scene where Jim and Carl have their sort of discussion in the parking lot, and there's times where the camera will be pulled back far enough. We're not always there in sort of like the medium shot. There's times where the camera, will be moved back to watch something as an observer from farther away. And this is one where I felt could have easily felt like a large scale TV episode of a show, but there were so many smart choices to elevate it above that, because it's a simple story, but everything done around it elevates that subject matter as well. And so I want to give credit to the director as well of a great way of taking this strong story, but making much more out of it.
It was the right amount of show to tell us what was going on in the movie. And that so rarely actually has the right balance. So I was very impressed by that.
So I think we're at a time where we can talk about where it fell in our rankings here. This one was challenging.
Very challenging.
For me. And I think you're going to end up ranking it higher, because I think I'm getting a sense of you have this strong emotional connection to movies that we've discussed before. And for me, this one was a little bit more difficult. This is the horrible thing about Flickchart, is that first one, that break point, can just really, condemn a movie right off. And for right now, Elf is at my halfway point. So this one, this was one that I couldn't put it.
Compare movies to Elf.
Right. Exactly. It's challenging. So it ended up at, lower down on my list. Out of 309, it ended up at 259, which is, really low, I guess. It's the 16% mark. Yeah. Just below the horror film Belko Experiment, and then just above the Harry Potter sort of franchise spin-off Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So after your case for this, on rewatching, I may come back to this one, but for me, it just, again, my expectations of that procedural, I think, just tainted my overall view. I agree that it's solid performances, but I felt like I wanted more out of this. So I enjoyed it, but just not, it's not one where I'm like, yeah, I'm eager to watch this again, or sit down with somebody and say, you have to see this movie. This isn't a have to see. It's sort of I think a lot of the films that we discuss here on Trailer Rewind fall into that. Hey, here's something you may not have thought about, and if you've got some time, it's worth watching, but I wouldn't put this in the have to see category. So it's at 259 and a solid 3-star for me on my letterbox. Solid
Okay.
3-star.
Well, see, that's good. And with everything you say, I still wouldn't say it's better than Elf. So I totally
Yeah.
understand what
Okay.
you're saying there.
Okay.
For me, my middle movie is Split. And I think, and Split is, I guess maybe a very coincidental movie to have right in the middle of my flick chart. But I think Split is a very good movie. But this actually jumped up higher than that. And that's just because I think that this movie has much more to say than Split did. And that's why I put it there. I actually had to rank it a couple times because I was kind of confused at how I was going to rank this one. Similar to what you're talking about, I think it's a great stream. I think if you find it on Hulu or Amazon Prime, which is where I watched it, I think you'll be so happy and surprised. I don't think it's nearly as, if you missed it, it's not a tragedy like Miss Sloane was. The fact that people didn't see Miss Sloane is still bugs me. But this is one that I'm going to recommend to people if they're looking for a movie. If they love cop movies, this is a great movie about what it's like to be a human cop in the world. So mine got up pretty high. I almost ranked it a 4.5 stars, but in general, there were some things that I wasn't super happy about. The sort of repeating of things. I didn't like the opening with the repeating of the emergency call. I didn't like that we saw him having a conversation with Carl, but were blotted out by helicopters, and then we went back and watched it again. That stuff I didn't need to see. So instead, I just went down to a 4 stars. But again, I was so impressed with the way that the story was creatively told and visually told that it went up pretty high on my flick chart. It's number 76 out of 172 movies.
Okay.
So, and that puts it, it's in a weird spot though. That's in the 56th percentile, which I actually am kind of happy with that percentile. It's just below The Godfather Part 2.
Wow.
Which seems like a weird thing to have there. And just above Experimenter, which we saw on Trailer Rewind here too. Again, it kind of goes with the same thing about Split. I really liked Experimenter as well, but I think that Felony has more to say from a philosophical standpoint. And so I went with the story on that one.
See, and that's why to me, I don't recommend this as a cop movie. To me, it's more of a movie about human condition that happens to be set in cop. Sort of a story around police officers. Sure. But yeah, to me, this is very much a character piece, somebody that enjoys a good character-based story, driven by dialogue and good character pieces and solid performances. Because when I think of police, movies, like I said, I start to think of procedurals, a little bit more action. And it does have that opening raid where Malcolm gets shot. But that's really about it. And you've got a couple other little scenes where they're going in and doing some more bus of this drug ring. But yeah, to me, this is really for somebody that's interested in a story about, again, what does it mean to be human and character. So that's who I would recommend this for. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
It's about justice or about law and order, more than police work. So yeah,
we're on a pretty good streak. We haven't had anything.
Yes, I'm very happy with our movies this year.
We've nothing that's been like a complete, disaster. Nothing that I've regretted watching. So I'm feeling pretty.
They're out there.
Yeah,
we got to go find them.
If you want, I'll dig them up. But I'm on a nice roll because last week I saw Quiet Place, which is just a tremendous movie. Not for you, I don't think. I don't know.
Nope.
I thought if JJ were here, he'd be out in the hallway watching this one, peeking around the corner. But it is a tremendous film that I can't recommend enough. I am encouraging people to see it. Go to a really early show when there's not that many people, because in general, audiences don't know how to be quiet during a film. So to enjoy this on the big screen, go. One of my coworkers saw it like a Sunday at 10 o'clock. He said there weren't a lot of people, or at least it was people that just respected, film. And
right.
He said there was not a peep out of anybody, which was great because you could let the silences of the film and the ambient sound, because there's not a lot of dialogue, work really well. It's one that I'm recommending. It is intense. It will ratchet up your heart rate. It's got quite a few jump scares that got me, but it was pleasantly surprising. So
That's what I dislike about movies is jump scares. So yeah, I'm not going to see that one.
Okay. And then I've got to find.
Not looking for jump scares.
This weekend we're going to be doing Film Board on Beirut. So that's the next thing that's it's going to be on my list to see, is get out and see that one for the Film Board. Yeah. What about you? Seen anything recently?
Well, we talked about Harold and Maude a little bit.
Yes.
I watched that. We talked about that on the Saturday matinee. My big thing about that is I think it's what it would be like if Wes Anderson directed The Graduate, and that's kind of my feelings about that movie. But I thought it was good. I understand why it's special. I can't say that I'm looking forward to Beirut, but I'm interested. I think that there's a real chance for this movie to be very interesting, and it has a very interesting counter programming sort of aspect right now for this time of year. So I'm hopeful for it. I think it's going to make for a really good conversation, especially with some of the social criticism that's come out about it. It's actually opening at on a commemorative date for the Lebanese Civil War, which seems really odd considering the subject matter.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of things to talk about inclusion and accuracy in terms of historical films, which is what this is trying to be, based on a true story. So so I'm looking forward to the Beirut discussion. I'll be seeing that this weekend leading up to the show.
All right, great. And for all our listeners out there, if you haven't already, please head over to iTunes and give us a rating and a review. It helps other film fans find us. And we hope that you will help other fans discover us, because then we're building a community, and there's nothing more thrilling than discovering a like-minded group of film lovers online. It's like finding a new home. And the best thing that you could do is go watch a movie with a friend and then sit down and have a conversation about it. And if it's one that we've discussed on any of our shows, please let us know, because we love hearing from you. We'd love to hear how moved you may have been by Felony. Did you find it a thrilling cop drama, a great statement about the human condition? Let us know. Also want to make special thanks out to Pete Wright for taking time out of his busy schedule to edit this into a coherent conversation and precisely placing those audio clips that we give him. Thank you, Pete.
That dude.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, JJ, you have a great evening.
Thank you, too.
Hondo.